Good evening. I would like to call to order the Monday, May 6th meeting of the Quincy City Council Ordinance Committee. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Councilor Kane. Councilor Kroll. Councilor DeBona.
Present.
Councilor Harris.
Present.
Councilor Hughes. Councilor Mahoney. Councilor McCarthy. Councilor Palmucci. Chairman Liang.
Present.
7 members, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio or video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made, whether perceived or unperceived by those present, and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. Thank you. Okay, the matters before us this evening is Council Order 2018-027, ordinance amending City of Quincy zoning ordinance, adding Section 6.10 marijuana establishments, 2018-028, order accepting the sales tax provision of MGL Chapter 64N, marijuana tax as amended by Chapter 55 of the Acts of 2017, and thirdly, 2019-042, order consolidated urban revitalization and development plan and amendment number 5. We're going to look through the first two items first, which is related to marijuana establishments. And I just want to make clear that the last two meetings we held on this were before the summer of last year. We held a meeting back on April 25th of 2018 and June 4th of 2018. And since then, the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission has tightened up some of their regulations, which are in all of our packets this evening. And thus, I just wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to gather, not just for us, but for the public as well, to be updated on any of the language pertaining to our particular ordinance. And then from here, have an opportunity to digest this information, make any proposed amendments that we need to, and then come back to finalize this ordinance. So again, just to make it clear, the two ordinances related to marijuana before us this evening are, I'm not anticipating a vote on it this evening just because, it has been a little while since we have met on it, and I want to make sure that we have time to digest the new information that's in front of us this evening. So with that, we do have a red-line diversion to the original ordinance in front of us, and I would like to call up our Assistant City Solicitor, Mr. Steve Durkin, to just review why those red-lined items are there, and then just to provide us an opportunity up here on the council to ask any clarifying questions. Good evening, Steve. How are you?
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the council. So I'm just looking at this red line version, and so on to page 2, where we have some crossouts there under section 6.10.4, and that subsection is entitled Prohibition. And the reason for that deletion is that the 2017 version of the Marijuana Act takes care of all of that, and all of those issues regarding an applicant's convictions for violating drug laws, marijuana laws, etc. Those are all under the purview of the Cannabis Control Commission, not really under the jurisdiction of local communities. So that's not necessary, and that's why that was deleted. We have some other changes here, which just changed the numbers of sections, and that's because of a delete. That's because of the deletion, so it just moved everything up. And then moving to where it says page 5 of 5, under section. Thank you. Working? Under section 6.10.9, can everyone hear me? Entitled On-Premises Consumption of Marijuana Prohibited. So in that one, we wanted to exclude on-premises consumption of marijuana products, in the city of Quincy. And at the time, we were told that the Cannabis Control Commission was taking up that issue. It didn't end up in its regulations at that point. And apparently, it's still being considered, as far as I know. So we added in the wording, with the advice of counsel, that no licensed marijuana establishment shall permit the on-premises consumption of marijuana, and this is the new wording, unless and until such type of establishment is approved pursuant to the provisions of the Code of Massachusetts regulations, and unless such establishment has been licensed for such on-premises consumption pursuant to the authority of the CCC, and unless such establishment has been granted a special permit by the city pursuant to the provisions of the ordinance. So we reiterated that it wasn't allowed, but that we were aware that that might change, subject to changed CMR regulations by the Cannabis Control Commission. And then further down that page, that was an error where we were talking about notification of the community outreach meeting being given to several people, including the city clerk, the planning board, and it had read Department of Inspectional Services, and it should have read Zoning Board of Appeals, which is the special permit granting authority under this ordinance. I would offer one further amendment on that same page, page 5 of 5, and that's just from going through it today. I hadn't picked this up in quite a while. And so I noticed this, and under section 6.10.12, entitled Notification, there's a lot of notification requirements in there, and the reason for that, obviously, is to give the community notice of what's going on, to give counselors notice of a potential marijuana establishment, especially in their neighborhood, and to offer counselors a chance to have community meetings themselves even after a community outreach hearing. But I think the first sentence where it reads, "Any new applications for state licensing and for permitting sought under this ordinance must be publicly advertised," et cetera, that entire first sentence, I think, is superfluous. I don't think it's needed. We have enough notification requirements, and I think this just confuses things. So I would offer that in the form of an amendment, just for your consideration, even at a future date.
So just to clarify, Steve, sorry for interrupting if you wanted to finish that thought. So the 6.10.12 notification where it says, "Any new applications for state licensing and for permitting sought under this ordinance must be publicly advertised in a newspaper with local circulation for a period of no less than 7 days, with the cost of such advertisement to be borne by the applicant." That's the one that you're looking to remove?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm suggesting that it's not necessary in light of everything that follows in that paragraph.
Okay.
So the way it would look, the way it's set up under Chapter 94G, is that a potential marijuana establishment owner, whether it's a retail store or some other establishment, would come to the city. They would obviously have a location. They would have a property that they either owned or rented, and they would set up a community outreach meeting with members of the community to let them know what they intend to do and where they intend to do it. And then the next step, and the abutters would have to get notice of all that, abutters within 300 feet. And it would have to be noticed, publicly advertised in the newspaper as well. And then the second step would be to enter into negotiations for a host community agreement with the city of Quincy. And then once those things were done, the potential owner, the potential business person could fill out an application and bring that to the Cannabis Control Commission for its consideration. And they would make sure that everything is in order. And then the Cannabis Control Commission would notify the local city or town that there was a pending application and ask the city or town to indicate whether the applicant had complied with all local ordinances that were in place. And the local city or town would have 60 days to reply, either that they had been complied with or that they hadn't. And then at that point, the Cannabis Control Commission would be in a position to either grant a license or not. So that's how the procedure would work. Once again, local communities do have some input into what goes in their city or town. And local communities under Chapter 94G are allowed to impose reasonable safeguards, reasonable restrictions, including specifically time, place, and manner. So a city can govern the time, place, and manner of these marijuana establishments. And those safeguards have to be such that they're not unreasonably impracticable for a business person to want to do business under those rules. So that's all set up under 94G. I think, Madam Chair, I thought I heard you say that before the council tonight, too, was consideration of the acceptance of the local tax? Okay. And that's an important piece of this, and, you know, we don't know when a marijuana establishment might set up business in Quincy, but the 3% sales tax, in my mind, would be sort of a no-brainer, because whether it happens or not, at least the city has to accept that provision, Chapter 64N, and that allows the city to charge a sales tax up to 3%. And so I offer that to you, and I recommend it. In addition, as long as we're talking money, Chapter 94G also allows, under the host community agreement process, to impose an additional 3% charge on gross sales for up to 5 years. And that's something that you'll see is contained in this ordinance in any case. So with all that being said, any questions?
Thank you, Steve. I have a few, but I want to just defer to my colleagues first, if anybody has any questions. No? All right, I will dig into mine then, I suppose. I'm actually just going to start on the one that you had just spoken about, so the 3% of the tax on sales of marijuana that we can impose, but then we also have an additional 3% of gross sales that we can agree to with the host community agreement. Is that an annual number that we're looking at? Do you know? I'm just reading through this and I'm trying to have an understanding of what that additional 3% impact fee would look like.
Okay. The additional 3% impact fee, I guess it acknowledges that for the first number of years that these establishments come into a city or town, they might cause the city to absorb costs. And that would be costs in figuring out how to monitor these establishments, how to get the police department involved, maybe the health department, maybe some other city agencies. And so there might be some startup costs with this. And so 94G allows cities, as part of the host community agreement negotiation, to impose up to a 3% impact fee. And that impact fee has to be reasonably related to the actual costs incurred by the city. And the city is required to keep a record of what those costs are. So, you know, if the police department gets called to a business, that, you know, that's a cost, arguably. If the health inspector has to go down there 5 or 6 times, that's a cost, arguably. So it has to be reasonably related to the actual cost, and the city has to keep a record of those actual real costs, and those costs have to be kept as a public record.
Okay, thank you. Next, I have a question about other fees that are listed in here. So I know that we have a couple of fees. One of them is, let's see here, under, this is on page 4, number 11, under hours of operation, we talk about initial violation of not more than $1,000, and then for subsequent violations, not more than $5,000. And then on the 5th page, the one under notification, that amendment you made where it's public consumption of marijuana prohibited, that violation is $100. I'm just trying to get an understanding of where we came to those numbers.
Okay. Where's the first one, Counselor?
The first one's on page 4 under Hours of oh no, it might be on, my printer printed
Oh, I
for me. It might
see
be
it.
on page 3 or 4, depending on
Yeah, it's page
how it
4
printed.
of 5, and it's under subsection 11.
That's correct.
Those fees are intended to be harsh for violators, as you can see. $1,000, $5,000 for subsequent violations. These fees aren't anything that I got in Chapter 94G. When I drafted this ordinance, I was doing it kind of blindly because not many cities or towns had undertaken this.
Yeah.
And so I felt subjectively that these might be reasonable. Maybe they're too harsh, maybe they're not harsh enough. I'm not wedded to these. I don't take any pride in the authorship of these. If the councilors would like to offer amendments to change these, to make them more reasonable in your mind, that would certainly be appropriate. I won't say they were random, but they were sort of random when I drafted this ordinance.
Well, but they're meant to be punitive, obviously, is to make
They're
sure
meant-
that
they're meant to
folks,
be
you know, are
punitive and-
discouraged, yeah.
And to make it clear that the city of Quincy takes violations of this sort very, very seriously.
Okay, and then also, again, just related to fees, on the second page, it talks about an application fee that shall be established in an amount to be set by the Quincy City Council. And said fee shall be submitted to the applicant to the SPGA at the time of the application to the SPGA. So does that mean that, and there's no number in there for the application fee amount, so does that mean that we as a city council aren't establishing a set application fee in the ordinance and that we're going to be establishing it on an application basis?
Okay, I'm just trying to find it. Where is that now?
So you start on the bottom of page 1 and then go to page 2. It's 6.10.3,
Okay.
general marijuana establishments, and it talks
Okay, I
about-
see it. Yep. All right, yeah, so since the zoning board of appeals is the special permit granting authority, and since people who are filing appeals to the zoning board of appeals have to file appeal fees, and since they are the governing board on this issue under this ordinance, it seemed reasonable to me that there should be an application fee. And so I'm suggesting that the council could establish the amount of that fee in your wisdom. And I'm not suggesting that it could be, that it should be a huge cost. It could be a nominal fee. It could be $200.
Okay, but the way it's currently written, it sounds like, it shall be submitted at the time of the application to the SPGA, so, and then said fee shall be directly proportional and reasonably related to the administrative costs associated with processing, reviewing, and evaluating said application. So is this, again, to me, I'm just trying to figure out, are we looking to have a set number placed here in this ordinance, or are we looking to have a moving number?
When I drafted this, Counselor, it was in the early stages of this whole process. And yeah, I mean, I think the council could attach an exact figure to this tonight, or it could happen at a later time with an amendment to this if it were enacted.
Okay. That's helpful. I'm just trying to, again, get an understanding of process for us, too.
But as you can see, with the wording toward the end, directly proportional and reasonable related, that kind of adopts the language that was used by 94G as far as an impact fee, but also it's the sort of, it suggests that it should be a fairly nominal fee and not something exorbitant.
Yep. Okay. Is that something we'll have to look at? And then I also wanted to ask you about the distance that we're talking about. I know we all looked at this last time, and I went through and I looked through, again, the CCC's guidances, and it talks about how the state law establishes a 500-foot buffer around K-12 schools. The municipality may choose to reduce the size of that buffer. It is unclear whether buffer zones around other uses such as parks are legally permissible. So it seems, we were here before last year when we were looking at this,
Yes.
where they weren't 100% direct or clear about whether or not we could increase that buffer zone. And it sounds like they still are unclear about that. So am I reading that correctly? Again, I just want to sort of talk to you about this to make sure that I'm understanding that, because in the ordinance that we have in front of us, we're looking at doing 1,500 linear feet of any residential district, and then 500 linear feet of any schools, childcare, daycare centers, playgrounds, athletic fields, public park, libraries, et cetera. So based off of what I'm reading, they still haven't, again, been very direct or specific about the fact that it can't be more or less than 500.
Yeah, just briefly, a little background. When the first law was written in 2016, to my way of thinking, it was vague and ambiguous for cities and towns. It didn't really tell us what we could and what we couldn't do, but it sounded like we couldn't do very much. And then the Marijuana Act of 2017 gave us a little bit more insight as to what cities and towns could do, and gave us quite a bit more authority, I thought. But still, there were some provisions that were rather vague and didn't give us a lot of guidance. And one of those was the 500-foot buffer around public schools, around schools. And from my reading of the law, it says that cities and towns, it says that the state will require that marijuana establishments can't be within 500 feet of a school. And it goes on to say that cities can adopt regulations that reduce that from 500 to something less, but it doesn't go on and say it can alter it to above 500 or more than 500. But what I do know is that 94G says that the cities and towns can't enact ordinances or bylaws that are in conflict with state law. And I think my legal opinion would be that if the city adopted an ordinance which required a marijuana establishment to be more than 500 feet from a school, that would be in conflict with the state law as written. Even though, to me it's ambiguous because I would think the state law would have said cities and towns may adopt a bylaw that provides for a buffer that's less than 500 feet, but not more than 500 feet. And it did not do that.
Right. That's what I mean, is that it just, and I agree with you, that's what I'm trying to just clarify, is that the conversation we had about a year ago seems to be the same that we're having now because the language is still unclear. I mean, it says in here, it is unclear whether or not
Yeah.
buffer zones around other uses are legally permissible,
So if one of the councilors tonight wanted to say, I want to increase that to 1,000 feet or 750 feet,
Right.
I couldn't say for certain that that's in conflict with state law, not for certain.
As it's currently written in here, I mean, it's unclear.
Yeah, as it's currently
so-
written. Now, might someone challenge it? Sure, someone might challenge that. And, but that's my reading of it. My reading of it is that we can go below 500, but not above 500.
Okay. And then just the last question I have, and I know one of my colleagues has some questions for you as well, but the number of licenses that we are allowed to give out in the city here, I know because we are one of the municipalities that voted to legalize it, that we can't have, I'm sorry, is it that we can't have more than 20% of the number of liquor licenses, or that we can't have less than that? Like, we can permit up to, but we can't, stop underneath 20%.
The way the law reads, and this is another provision in 94G that gives cities and towns some authority over how many establishments can come into their city. So the law says that a city and town can reduce the number of marijuana retailers to no more than 20%, to no more than 20% of the number of liquor stores. But it can't reduce it to less than 20% of the number of liquor stores unless the city puts that on the ballot.
Okay, so we have to do at least 20% of the liquor licenses or more. We can't do less than that.
Well, that's not how it reads. It just says we can't put a provision in our local law that says we will not issue
I see what you're saying.
licenses
Okay.
we can't say, in other words, we will not issue licenses to more than 15% of the liquor stores.
Right. Okay.
We can't go below 20 in our local ordinance.
Okay. Thank you. I know that, that's all from me. I know that I want to think through what the fees look like, whether or not they're, sufficient, or if we should increase them or decrease them. And then I also want to look at the application fees that are presented when somebody submits an application. And then I also just want to think through the notice as well, the amendment that you're proposing, So I appreciate you answering my questions tonight. I know, again, one of my colleagues had questions. Councilor Mahoney?
Thank you very much. So I have a couple of questions. When we go back to the additional 3%, would that count for details? When a store opens, if you had to have details, would it cover details and those types of charges, or?
The impact fee?
Yeah.
Counselor, I would say that you could put any cost under that umbrella.
Okay.
Any reasonable cost, any cost to the city that we would not have incurred if it weren't for this
For
business.
this business, okay. I just wanted to make sure, because I know in other communities that was, traffic, there was a lot of different things that were going on in other
Yeah.
communities, because it's kind of it starts as a novelty and then dies down, but when it first comes, it's been impactful to those communities. Going off into those, when we first started this, you were writing it just like everybody else was, where we were kind of in the dark. I don't believe any of these establishments have opened, but since we started discussing this, we've had several locations throughout the state that have opened. Have we found some learnings from what those communities have done, and have we been able to apply any of those learnings into what we're presenting here tonight?
In other words, try to model this after what we've seen other communities do?
Try to model some of the successes that those communities have had, or potentially, if they're not having successes, what we can do to prevent those same issues from happening here in Quincy.
Well,
So yeah, I guess model the successes, but then also adapt to maybe what was not successful so that we can be better prepared here.
I have looked at other communities and some of the ordinances. Some of those didn't get into as much detail as we did, and weren't nearly as restricted. Some of them were just were really short, without much detail and without many safeguards. My marching orders here, from having talked to councilors and the mayor's staff, was to impose reasonable safeguards, which I've tried to do, and keep these marijuana establishments away from youth.
Right.
Under the age of 21. And I've done that in as many ways as I could think of. And I'm willing to take a look at again, this is still really new.
No, I know it is, and that's the reason why I asked that question. It's not so much to say that you haven't
Yeah.
stepped up to try to put those safeguards into what we're trying to do here, but at the same time, when we started to do the work for this ordinance, the other communities hadn't opened any of them, and they have now. And in some of those communities, not that what we want to try to do is make sure that we're learning from what they have done, because unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at this, what we had is a law that passed that didn't have a lot of, the communities were left to make up the direction of how we're going to do this. So we're a yes city, and we have to make up those determinations, but we have to do it in a way that protects and offers opportunities for the people who want to establish these stores, and the people who want to shop at them, as well as the people who live in the community. So with the fact that some of these stores have opened in other places, I guess the learnings that we could find from them as well. And like I said, not so much to loosen what we've done, but actually to make sure that we're creating the buffer zones that we need to make sure we're meeting our needs in the community, but then also being prepared for some of the things that maybe some of those communities were not prepared for, such as the traffic in the areas. Like Brookline had tremendous traffic in, and maybe it's the hours of operations that it happened. I'm not sure. I'm just asking if we're looking at those things, because this is going to be new to every community that's allowed to have them.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, this has been on the back burner for me. I've approached the mayor's office and talked to a couple of city councilors, and they just, I think we were all looking to see if the Cannabis Control Commission was going to establish more regulations or change things.
Yeah.
And then it's been new to every city and town. And yes, we have seen some facilities across the state, and I think the councilor makes a good point that we should learn from the experiences of those cities and towns, what they've gone through. And I'm certainly happy to take another look and a closer look at some of those cities and towns and see what they've done that maybe has worked and what they've done maybe that hasn't worked. And I'm willing to report back to the council. More than happy to do that.
I think it's just an important exercise to go through. If we were the first, then we would be leading that way. And by no means do we want to be the first in this, I don't think. The other question I had was when we were talking about 20% of establishments, and we were doing math back here, do we know how many in total if we were to go with how many liquor stores that we have currently right now, how many cannabis stores would that mean?
I don't want to put her on the spot, but the city clerk is here, and she may know the answer to that.
The number of liquor stores that we have currently and the potential number of cannabis stores that would be able to come from, not exactly, I'm just roughly.
Nicole, wasn't it about 35?
Yeah, so altogether, we did the math, and it was 7 establishments.
Okay, right, so it's, the number's 30, we have 35 liquor stores, so potentially there could be up to 7 if we limit it to no more than 20% of the number of liquor stores, as we have provided for in this ordinance.
Is it liquor stores only, or is it liquor stores and pouring establishments?
It's just liquor stores.
Just liquor stores, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
all right, you're welcome.
Counsel McCarthy?
Yes, thank you. Evening, Steve.
Counselor, good evening.
I'd like to go back to that 500-foot question again. I know we talked about it a while ago, and Counselor DeBona brought it up about, can we make it a larger amount? To kind of dovetail in on what Mrs. Mahoney was saying about other communities, is there anyone out there that's above 500? Is 500 the example you found?
Yeah, I haven't seen anyone over 500, and I have looked at some of the other towns, and some of them, I want to say Northampton, and don't quote me on that, but somewhere out in Western Mass, they went below 500 down to 200. Not really sure why, but they did.
Right, and is there a way to, and I know you've probably been looking at that again, but, I've been looking at it, is there a way to try to nail that down, that 500 is the number? Is it anywhere out there that we can't go above 500? It's telling us 500? Or is that just what you're surmising from discussions?
I believe the state law reads that the Cannabis Control Commission requires that applicants' businesses not be within 500 feet of a pre-existing school. And the Cannabis Control Commission has issued advisories saying that cities and towns can go below 500 feet if they wish. And it doesn't say they can increase it.
Right.
So even though it seems ambiguous to me, and it is, because they could have been more clear about that, 94G makes clear that cities and towns can't do anything in conflict with the provisions of the state law. So from a legal standpoint, it seems to me that adding on to the 500 up to 600 or 700 or more would be in conflict with the state law. I might not be right about that, but I haven't seen another city or town do that. You know, I was even looking at the criminal statutes involving selling drugs in school zones. Remember it used to be if you sold drugs in school zones, and a school zone was considered within a 1,000-foot radius of a school, that you'd have additional penalties, and I think it was mandatory penalties. In 2012, that was reduced to 300 feet around schools and 100 feet around parks.
Okay.
So for selling marijuana at a licensed establishment, the state has imposed a 500-foot buffer, which is even more than, you know, that, for the illegal selling of drugs.
Okay, I know we got a few things to tweak in here. At least that's what I'm understanding a little bit from the comments. I'm fine to work with my colleagues on application fee, and I'm more than fine with what's in here right now for the violation fees. And I know, Steve, first of all, I want to thank you. I know we've done a lot of work. You've done a lot of work behind the scenes to try to tweak this so it's a best possible plan in Quincy with something that we have to abide by, get by, and figure it out the best way to protect ourselves here, especially in the performance standards section. So thanks for all your hard work. But if you could you take one more look at that 500 for me, just to see if something else pops up somewhere in any community or anything like that? Thank you.
I'm happy to do that, and I would also point out that, and some of you may have read this, but the Cannabis Control Commission periodically puts out advisories, and they don't seem to change that much. But I did read one recently where it said that, cities can adopt, they can adopt licensing processes for this. We haven't done that. We're going through a special permit granting authority being the zoning board, but cities can actually use a licensing authority, I guess, and if it chooses to go in that direction. And it also made clear that cities are certainly free to send police officers into these establishments to make sure that the law is not being violated, and they can send health inspectors into these establishments to make sure that, that they're keeping up with the sanitary code, the state sanitary code. So all of those things are just additional safeguards that we can have in place.
Okay, thanks, Steve,
But
appreciate
I
it.
will check on that again.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Councilor
you.
McCarthy. Okay, anyone else have any other questions for Steve this evening? All right, great. Thank you, Steve, for your time. And again, I'll follow up with you for these items for follow-up. We'll look into the amendment that you had proposed, and I'll make sure that, as we go through this updated ordinance, that if anybody else has any amendments they'd like to propose, that we work those in there for a final draft before we have you come in front of us again. Thank you, Steve.
Madam Chair, thank you, councilors.
All right, councilors, we're going to go ahead, and what I would like to do, because I just want to keep an eye on the time, we've got about 15 minutes before we have to close and open up the regular city council meeting. So moving on to the URDP, there are quite a number of updated information packets that have been given to us, and so I would like to, just so the folks who are going to be presenting and helping answer questions, if possible, just get a quick rundown of what these changes are, what the answers to our questions were from our last meeting, and then hold the questions for after the city council meeting. We'll recess this and then come back into the ordinance meeting for questions. So if that works with you guys, I'd like to take the 15 minutes to, again, give you an opportunity to go through the answers to the three questions that we had asked before. I see that there is a memo for a change, Mr. Geary, that you had presented as well, if you could just review that with us. And we'll close it out, open the regular council meeting, come back into this for an opportunity for questions. Does that work? Great. I'm just looking at you because I know that there's a memo that you had sent that I'd like to go over. And again, just go over the three questions that we had asked before. The first is the potential cost to take all 14 properties designated in the URDP and the impact that will have on future DIF revenue. We wanted to know what were the current and future communication plans for both landlords and tenants. And then we also wanted to know if all taxes and fines paid on properties designated for potential acquisitions. Yeah, we just wanted to know an answer to that question as well. So again, if you could just go through, either Mr. Geary yourself or somebody from the planning department, the answers to those three questions with us tonight, as well as, again, this memo that you had sent over about one of the properties. Oh, I'm sorry, and just before you start, I just want to make sure my colleagues know too, and all the information that was presented to us tonight, there are also two communications that were presented regarding properties in this URDP proposal. The first is from Dr. Eric Cohen, and the second is from Sherman III Realty Trust. So if you could just make sure to find that in your packets as well. Good evening, Bill.
Good evening, Madam Chairwoman. Bill Geary, Special Counsel to Mayor Koch. The most recent memo that I submitted to the council was to advise the council that the administration has decided to withdraw one of the parcels that was designated for placement on the potential taking list. Now, I want to emphasize, as was emphasized in our prior sessions, that all of those properties are listed as potential takings, and they were placed on the list for a variety of purposes, both strategic as well as specific to the property themselves, whether they were blighted, whether they might be properties that would qualify for rehabilitation, or in the case of buildings that are totally blighted and unoccupied and unusable for demolition. The building that we have decided to strike from the list is 119 Parking Way, commonly referred to and known as the IHOP building, pending further deliberations in the planning process as to the location of a new municipal garage in the Ross lot that is tentatively scheduled to occupy that area of the Ross garage. As the council knows, we have pending before it a request for an appropriation under the DIF appropriation request for money to effectuate a preliminary design of that garage, and the siting of that garage will be a byproduct of how that design comes out, predicated upon access and egress, as well as the new bridge, which is under construction, and of course, the right-of-way of the MBTA Red Line. So in removing that property, it's stricken from the list, and the council need not consider it until such time as the administration has completed those deliberations and determines whether or not it's suitable for placement on a future list, or it's suitable under the rubric that it is a public improvement, a necessary public improvement. The other item that I can speak to is the outreach and communication plan concerning the ongoing revitalization of Quincy's downtown, a plan that the chairwoman specifically requested at one of our prior meetings. I think it was maybe April 24th or thereabouts. And I want to emphasize that you may recall that evening, Mr. Fatsy's director of the planning department spoke to the ongoing efforts by the planning department to engage in outreach to the community, both the business community as represented by the various merchants in the downtown, as well as landowners, very often not one and the same, but different. And I can speak to certainly the 3 years, well, actually more prior to that, as chairman of the planning board. I can speak to my own direct knowledge that he and his staff have always vigorously communicated with the communities that are affected by various projects which come before the planning department and ultimately the planning board. And so the list that has been assembled here is really a compendium of efforts that have gone on in the past, but in the case of what I'll characterize as remote locations, has been expanded a bit, predicated on the success of that same initiative by the planning department. For example, with the plans for the Hancock Garage, which is, as we all know, currently under construction and underway. And the planning department established an exhibit in the main exhibit hall of the beautiful main library. And that was there for several months. And many citizens and visitors to Quincy and merchants from the downtown were advised of that exhibit and were able to visit it and see the renderings of the garage, as well as a video that was on a monitor that continuously replayed a film that this council was presented with prior to its approval of that garage, the funding for that garage. And what we thought would be appropriate was to look at some of the new buildings that are coming online as a result of the, that very first series of projects. Cliveden Place, as we all know, has been developed by a local developer, the Galvin Brothers, and is substantially complete. Its housing stock of condominiums has been substantially sold and occupied. Indeed, one of the occupants of that building appeared here at our last meeting to testify about his aspirations for continued development in that area. And they have finished off some retail space on the ground floor of that building facing Hancock Street. It will be really the first new building constructed on Hancock Street in many, many years, other than west of Chestnut. And we'll have retail space, and they have graciously and generously offered to make that available for the city to showcase other developments that are underway, to have an open house if that's appropriate, and that we would notify the merchants and landowners, building owners in the neighborhood of these kinds of events by visiting those businesses and providing them with brochures describing the pace of development and what they can expect for new developments. We're doing the same thing at President's Place, where there is display space there. And of course, here in the lower confines of this building, this historic building, so that visitors to this building can have a chance to see the contrast between the old and the new Quincy. And that would augment efforts that we have made over the course of the last couple of years. Many of you may be familiar with an exhibit that was established at the Ford's Restaurant pursuant to a public meeting that was held with the merchants in the from the Hancock Lot area that I know the chairwoman attended, where after that meeting, we did meet one-on-one with a lot of the merchants, and the owner of the Fours offered to have utilize his entryway to show people what the new garage and what the new civic space would look like. And so the planning department did arrange for that to occur. The next new space after Cliveden Street that should appear on Hancock Street will be the so-called LBC building, which, as we all know, will have retail space along the entire corridor of Hancock Street on the east side of Hancock Street. And one of the unique elements of that will be a glass atrium that goes from the corner of Cottage Ave through that building and out into this new civic space. It is owned by the city, and we would place exhibits in there that also update everyone who has reason to come to the downtown area for work or for enjoyment or for restaurants or a growing residential population. They would have an opportunity to see a variety of exhibits with regard to the look of the new downtown and what they can expect by way of amenities and new businesses and buildings that will be occupying that area soon to include a completed 715-space garage, and so that, in sum and substance, along with the usual outreach through QATV and the Quincy Sun and the Patriot Ledger, are sort of the totality of the effort that the administration will make to establish even more vigorous outreach to those members of the community who need to know or want to know more about what we're doing.
That there's one more question of those three that we do need to go over as well, so we can, and that's an important one. It has to do with the taxes and the fines that were paid on the properties that are under the taking, but I don't want to squeeze that last bullet item into the last 2 minutes. So if it's all right with you, I'm going to go ahead and again recess the ordinance committee meeting, and then once we wrap up with the regularly scheduled council meeting, we can come back, answer that third question, and then open it up to questions from my colleagues.
I might ask respectfully that the person who assembled and assimilated the answers to the questions was Mr. Stevens, the Deputy Director of the Planning Department. I believe he would be the most knowledgeable person to answer questions because he actually dealt with the documents. I dealt with some of them, but he dealt with all of them.
All right, sounds good. I'd be happy to have Mr. Stevens up here once we reconvene. Thank you, Mr. Geary. Okay, so at this point, I will recess the ordinance committee meeting at 7:29 PM.
I am, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, May 6, 2019 meeting of the Quincy City Council. Madam Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Counselor Kane. Present. Counselor DeBona. Present. Counselor Harris. Counselor Hughes. Counselor Liang. Counselor Mahoney. Present. Counselor McCarthy. Present. Counselor Palmucci. Present. President Kroll.
Present. 9 members. We have a quorum at this time. If you wouldn't mind, please rising and joining me in a moment of silence, keeping in our thoughts and prayers those courageous men and women who so dutifully defend our country. And if you would, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all very much. Madam Clerk, if you please would read into the record the open meeting law.
Pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio, video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made, whether perceived or unperceived, by those present and are deemed acknowledged and permissible.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And with the indulgence of the council, I was asked by Councilor Yang if we could take agenda item number 10 out of order, seeing that there were some folks here this evening and that this item will go to committee. Madam Clerk, would you please read the item?
It's a resolve, 2019 reinstatement of the City of Quincy Commission on Disabilities.
On the item, Council Mahoney.
Thank you very much. I'm waiving the reading tonight, and I want to welcome many of the people who are here in the audience tonight. I spoke with the mayor's, with Chris Walker at the mayor's office, and this is something that we're eager to get back up and operational. But before I do, I just want to make sure that I'm recognizing Councilor Brad Kroll and Nina Liang, who also are introducing this with me tonight. The City of Quincy we do meet the laws, but our Commission of Disabilities has been inactive for the last several years. And it's really, really important with all the development and many of the things that are going on in our city that we reestablish those communication lines so that we're able to service the people who live in our community. And there's been many things along the way, but the most important thing for me is that while I was on the school committee, I chaired special education. And it was deep in my heart, but more importantly in my own family. My cousin John Mulligan sat on the Commissions of Disabilities, and at his services for his sister, who was autistic, who passed away, I had said to John that I would make sure that this was a priority for me on the council to reestablish this commission and to make sure that people like himself who work and live and have a very full life are also able to advocate for those who also need those kinds of to be able to have a voice in the city. And more importantly, and I will end it with this, is that one of the things that happened that really drove this home for me was when we were having the MBTA meetings over at North Quincy. And it's very important for people to understand that many people who have disabilities choose to live in Quincy or choose to live in communities that are close to public transportation and have a lot of the offerings that we have here in Quincy. And they choose that so they can have independent lives and to be able to live and self-sufficiently on their own. And because although they are challenged with sometimes things that make it difficult for anybody else when looking at them, they live a very fulfilling life, and they do that with the help of commissions such as the Commission of Disabilities. So with that, I'd like to wholeheartedly recommend that this go to the mayor's office and we get this reestablished. I know there's many people who want to be on it. I'd like to make sure that my cousin John Mulligan is on it, because I did make that promise to him. John's a fantastic person, and I'm very proud of how much he's accomplished in his own life. But thank you very much for all of those who have come out tonight. And I know that it may seem as though not everybody understands, but the Commission of Disabilities will allow our city to be better able to meet the needs of people's disabilities so that they'll be able to be active and have a voice in our community. And a simple thing like this can make the difference between being, independent and having a voice. So thank you very much.
But Counselor, on that, I know that you moved approval. Do you want this to live in a committee as well, or just move passage?
I'd like to move passage of this tonight if we could, because I
Gotcha.
think this is something that can be active in the mayor's office and relatively quick to reestablish. I know I spoke with Mr. Walker about this, and I know he's
Yep. We
happy
just
and
want to
eager
make
to
sure
get
we
going on
capture
that.
it. Perfect. So motion made by Counselor Mahoney, second by Counselor Yang. On the motion, Counselor Yang.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to take a moment to commend and to, from the bottom of my heart, thank my colleague for introducing this evening. I think that, again, speaking from her experience and what she's done with the schools, for me, this isn't just about folks, with any physical disabilities. It's also for those folks with developmental disabilities. My younger sister went through the school system here in Quincy when she was very young and has also had a very fulfilling life. And I think it has largely in part to do with what we've done as a city and provided for these residents across the city. So I, again, I'm thanking her from the bottom of my heart to make sure that this not only addresses, folks across the city who have physical disabilities, but developmental disabilities as well. And I just think that it's a wonderful thing to, bring this back to life, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it move forward. So thank you, Counselor. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Motion made by Counselor Mahoney, second by Counselor Yang. On the motion, Counselor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I applaud Mrs. Mahoney for the reestablishment of this commission. For 12 years, I sat on the school committee and made it a point to stay on the special education subcommittee. One of those reasons, a big reason, was out of the 8 McCarthy kids that are, that were home, that are out running around, probably in different locations where they're not supposed to be right now, but out of the 8, I have 4 with severe special needs, 3 with Down syndrome that are nonverbal, and a son, Gerald, who's blind. So over the years, my wife and I paid a lot of attention to any of the ADA compliant issues that would come up and get involved in. And I told my wife this evening that this was coming into play again. And she was excited, and I was too, and she reminded me when I left, you're a father and you deal with it every day. You see it every day. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing for the city. I also want to recognize a lot of members from the school department led by Dr. DeCristofaro tonight. Over the 12 years on the school committee, they did nothing but try to make things better for the special needs kids in Quincy with ADA compliant building changes, ADA compliant technology. They fostered and created a very strong special needs parent advisory committee. Carol Dumas, who I was talking to in the front row, was with me for a lot of years. She reminded me it was a lot of years ago, Carol, but we're still young at heart. And I also want to commend the mayor and the city. Things like this sometimes we forget, but I know that the mayor looks at the old buildings, the new buildings, the technology, and does a great job with his crew on looking at what we can do at all the public buildings as well as the schools in regards to making them compliant. So it's all good stuff, and you know, it's great. And I know everybody has a story of their own in some capacity out there, so I'll be in full support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Counsel McCarthy. Motion made by Counsel Mahoney, second by Counsel Yang. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Counselor Kane.
Yes.
Counselor DeBona.
Yes.
Counselor Harris.
Yes.
Counselor Hughes. Counselor Liang. Counselor Mahoney. Counselor McCarthy. Counselor Palmucci. President Kroll.
Yes.
9 members.
9 members, the item passes. Thank you for your work, counselors. Next item on the agenda, please, Madam Clerk.
Next item is number 1, 2019-083, an appropriation for fiscal 2020 general fund budget.
At this time, we welcome to the podium the mayor of the city of Quincy, Mayor Koch. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the City Council. Always look forward to this night. The budget before you, I think, reflects the values of our city. I thank you for the work you do each and every day on behalf of the residents. And I know there's some members of the school committee behind me. I do want to acknowledge Vice Chair Emily Lebo, Member Doug Guttrow, Member Anthony Andronico. I appreciate working with them as colleagues on the school side. So this year's budget is up about 4.6%, for $325 million. And the big increase is in the school side, 5% increase. As you all know, we are in our 5th year, going into a 5th year of a 2- and 3-year contract, totaling 5 with our city employees. We started at 1% 5 years ago. This contract has taken effect July 1. Reflects a 3% increase across the board for all city employees, with the exception of the elected employees of our city. So that is a big chunk. We have an increase in our health insurance line, as usual, and our pension line. So we're looking at a 4.6% increase. As you can see, almost 80% of the budget is public safety, education, and benefits. The next graph you see, that kind of spells it out a little bit more detail. And I would add in the education budget, it shows 34% in that graph, but when you add up all of the other city services that contribute to the school department, including the grounds at the parks, including the public buildings department service in the buildings, including the personnel benefits as well, it's more like 50% of the budget, which is probably in line with many communities that takes their education budget very, very serious. You can see the breakout on the other departments. The next is the public safety between the police and fire. And, you know, before I get into too much detail, I should add that in addition to the members of the school committee who are behind me, there's also a number of department heads here tonight, a number of department managers, a number of staff members that work so very hard in each and every day. I know they share the same passion for this city as you and I do, and bring that to work each and every day, serving the residents of the city with dignity and respect and with great dedication. So I want to thank them for their continued work. So the 2020 priorities, as I mentioned, the education budget's a $5.2 million increase. And I got to say that I'm so proud of our Quincy Public Schools, and I think anybody in this room would share that thought. I mean, you know, even prior to our administration, there's been a consistent dedication to the education system, to our public schools in Quincy, with trying to keep class sizes low. I know it was mentioned by Councilor McCarthy, the special education budget. We try to serve every child and that family's needs as we bring them through our school system so that every child has an opportunity to succeed. And we are well above the foundation budget, and I'm proud of that. So I want to thank my colleagues in the school committee, superintendent and his team, and again, this council for the cooperation. For the benefit of the public, as this body knows, we present the budget here. and I give the bottom line to the school department. I then become one of 7 members of the school committee to decide how that budget is disseminated on that side of the street. This body can only affect the bottom line, as the details is really reserved to the school committee. In here, you'll see also that we're going green on the food service side. I know Mrs. Lebo is in my office with a group of folks, including some students from our schools, who wanted to see us get away from styrofoam and some of those non-friendly environmental issues, and I'm proud to say that's part of this budget, and look forward to the school committee to implement that. Next slide, you see really a fifth of 1% is kind of new spending. That's either new personnel or expanded programs. So of the $14 million total, about $700,000 accounts for new spending. All the other increases are really fixed costs, such as contractual raises, as I alluded to earlier, pension, health insurance, et cetera, is pretty much built in. So it's, though the budget is a new one for the fiscal year, it reflects from the past fiscal year pretty close to what we've had in previous years when you add up the numbers. Some of the priorities this year include public safety. We're adding 2 patrol officers. We've been, as you all know, we've been creeping up in both the fire and police, where we think we should have an adequate number of personnel. Proud of our public safety departments. Response time in this city is excellent. I constantly hear from folks about the professionalism, the way the police and fire handle every situation. So we're certainly proud of the departments and the great work that they do. So we'll be adding some patrolmen. We'll be adding some additional operation training funding. And this does fully fund the fire department, all the companies to keep them in service. And we're seeing an incremental growth in our emergency management department under Ali Sleeman. And I applaud the work he's been doing, working with both police and fire. As you may recall, last spring we experienced some very difficult days, particularly in Ward 1, with a lot of flooding issues, and we had people out of their homes. And if there was an improvement needed, it's the way we looked at the sheltering and how we planned for that. And in this budget, there's some suitability study for some shelters. I think we have to get out of the schools, because you can't open the schools when you have people staying in the schools. So we're looking at a different approach, and we'll have more to report on that down the road. Next, Eric. This budget, I mentioned a few new items. We're adding a social worker to the Elder Services Department. As you know, we have a wonderful van program that serves the public. We have a terrific Kennedy Center with incredible staff and volunteers who serve the seniors. And I've heard from so many seniors how this has been so important to them, particularly when one loses a spouse and they have a lot of time in their hands and want to get out of the house. And they're so welcomed at the Kennedy Center. Well, we've also heard from a number of my department heads, when a senior gets a little bit into trouble or some issues, and they're not having the best experience handling some of those issues, and maybe there's no family involved, we'd like to have a person in the department where we can send out. We can reach out to a person in need and help them kind of navigate through the services they may require, whether it's through the city, whether it's through social elder services, or whatever it may be. I know in talking to Colleen Healy, head of the assessors, in dealing with some of the issues on abatements, and it's difficult for some seniors to navigate that, and maybe they need some help with the paperwork, and I just think it's time, a CDS our size, we can have somebody that actually will go to the home, the right background to help these seniors with those challenges. We're adding a civil engineer to the engineering division of the Department of Public Works. As you know, we have a lot of work on the street. A lot of bids have been opened, and there's going to be a lot of work happening this summer. I believe we're going to be touching about 100 streets through the appropriation that this body approved last year on streets, on some water mains, working with National Grid on a replacement number of gas mains as well. So we'll see a lot of activity this summer, and that engineer will help make sure we're getting everything we're paying for. We're expanding the after-school program, both by the Recreation Department and by the School Department. Decided to dedicate a portion of the money that we received from medical dispensary marijuana to go right back into prevention programs. Our Recreation Department does an outstanding job, as we know, with after-school programming. I think we can build on that. I know that we've had very successful Friday night programs during the school year. Some of that's been sponsored by Fox Rock. and some has been sponsored directly by our departments of addiction, Laura Martin, working well on that, as well as the Recreation Department. This will build on that, and I think it's good stuff. The school side, I've asked the superintendent if he would look at after-school enrichment programs. Rec is focused on physical education and sports. I'd like to see us focus on the arts and music with enrichment programs after school as well, and we'll talk more about that on the school side. We're transitioning the tourism appropriation. This does not affect the bottom line of the budget. As you know, this is funded by the hotel tax, which has the 85-15 ratio, 85 for park and rec and open space, and 15% for tourism. So we're looking at a new tourism director and those other budget items that go with it for purchasing brochures, et cetera. This budget also separates the beginning of the process of creating a new budget that's our department, I should say, that'll be funded directly by the District Improvement Financing Program. As you know, with the Hancock Adams Common construction, with the garage that's going to be open in September, along with new public space down there, I think it makes perfect sense that we now start to look at funding the maintenance of some of these things directly out of the taxes of the downtown, something we've been consistent about, that the downtown ought to pay for itself, and this is another step toward that. In addition, at the request of the council president, we're adding a reserve fund the first year out of the DIF that will sit and build over the years in case we have to tap that, although I'm very confident in the numbers that we're looking at, and I know this isn't about the DIF, but going forward with our capacity for borrowing and our ability to pay those bonds. So, next, Derek. So you see in the trends, water and sewer enterprise, which is a separate document but also submitted tonight. We're seeing no rate increase for the next fiscal year. Now that's a good thing. I know that we've seen some big jumps in sewer and water over the years. I want to certainly thank Commissioner Grazioso and his team on really bringing down that number of unaccounted for water. When I took office, I think it was in the high 30s, and we are now way, way lower than that. I think we're in the 12 to 13% range, which is more manageable. So we're finding those leaks, we're fixing those leaks. We pay for that water regardless with the MWRA, so it's imperative that we do that. In addition, the amount of work that we've done on the sewer lines, relining the sewer lines, we're paying for a lot of seawater in the sewer lines that was penetrating into the pipes. Again, we pay for that with the MWRA. With some of those appropriations we've had before you, we've relined a lot of those pipes all along the waterfront. You see those big manholes sticking up out of the marsh if you go out to the causeway in Squantum. There were great holes and areas of penetration. Those have been fixed. So we've done our part on the sewer and water side, but I also suggest that the MWRA, the increases have leveled off. The debt service they incurred many, many years ago has leveled off, which has resulted in not the steep bills to the city anymore for the water and sewer. So I know people get concerned about that number as well as they do their bills, so I think that's good news for the public. This is the first year in my 12 years that we will not be adding money to the snow budget this year. We finished with a $500,000 surplus, which we were very happy about. Winter wasn't too bad. You may recall, some of you, that when I took over, the snow and ice budget was $300,000, and it was that way for about 20 years. It was a built-in structural deficit that administrations know you can go and add it to the tax levy without a problem the following year, which we had to do. Actually, in lieu of that, we usually use surplus free cash to offset it, but we've reached that point where it's starting to level off, so we felt we could give it a break this year and see what brings next year. We continue to add to our reserves, both stabilization and the OPEB reserve funds, about $500,000 into those. And we've got some additional savings this year. We're seeing the new budget about $100,000 less in the streetlight program, which is a good thing. The bills are down. We also had less claims on the veteran side, so that's down. Of course, we're going into a leap year, so that adds $500,000 just based on the calendar and the payroll. Debt. So you can see the total debt service decreases as we're separating the debt out from the DIF program. Short-term debt this year increases a little bit because of the road improvement plan. and the Southwest Middle School, which will be finished later this year. We then convert the bond anticipated notes, the short-term debt, into long-term debt. And so you have the two categories in the debt service payment area. This budget appropriation does not include the revenue offsets. The hotel motel tax, for example, there's an offset based on a number of the park projects we've done, the bonds for those. Community preservation, there's an offset there for some of the building work that we did on this building, as well as the Coddington, which has long-term debt on them. So when you add up the offsets, it's about a 5.2% of the budget, which is extremely healthy. We're well low when you compare us to cities our size. We're maintaining a AA+ rating, maintaining lower debt than many cities and towns. Actually, there's only a few cities that would have a higher rate than ours. And the report, again, showed from Standard & Poor's strong budgetary performance, strong budgetary flexibility, low overall net debt. I'll say this, when they look at the bond rating, and we have these phone calls and sometimes visits, there's an awful lot of questions the bonding agencies ask of the city. And, one of the areas they're concerned with, not just about building reserves, but how are we maintaining our capital assets? That is a question that comes up on a regular basis. So the investments that we make in our assets matter. It's the right thing to do, for one. We're custodians of these buildings and these public assets. But it does get reflected on the scorecard, if you will, when the rating agencies look at our debt and look at our plans, protecting our assets going forward. Revenue looks stable. You can see there the 75% is the property tax. State aid is about 14% projected this year, and local receipts being about 11%. And again, for the folks at home, local receipts would mean excise taxes, you go and get a marriage certificate, all of those other general fees in government fall into that local receipt category. So it looks about similar. State aid percentage of the budget is down from where it was years ago, but we've been very healthy on the property tax side with the new growth we've experienced in our city. So you can see the year we're in is the total levy was up 1.5%. As you know, under the law, and the way cities and towns, municipal government is built, the main revenue driver is the property tax for every city and town. And under state law, you're allowed to go up 2.5% on the levy each year. We have not gone up full in the levy. In fact, we've had some new growth of about $18 million in the last 3 years, and we're sitting on a major reserve, if you will. This is one of the debates we have with our outside rating agencies. Some people argue you shouldn't leave any money on the table, you should tax to the max, build your reserves, et cetera. The flip side of that is when you are at the levy limit, you have nowhere to go unless you want to have a Prop 2.5 override. Last year, the city of Somerville had a Prop 2.5 override for high school. Recently, you probably read in the paper that Weymouth had a Prop 2.5 override for middle school. We're in our third school and doing an awful lot of infrastructure work without even being near our levy limit. And I think that's good fiscal policy and certainly gives the taxpayers of the city a break. And I know that people don't fully understand the excess levy capacity issue. And I know I sound flip when I say it, but we as a city could be taxing $31 million more without having a Prop 2.5 override. So I'm proud of where we are. I think we budget as we go. I think we've been very conservative, and that is paying off. And that speaks to some of what I just talked about. There's only 3 other cities in Massachusetts that have a more excess levy capacity out of 351 than Quincy. That's a pretty remarkable number. And that's almost $200 million over the last 10 years we've left on the table. So again, it's there if we had to tap it for an emergency or a catastrophe of some type. In addition to the budget we've submitting to you, as you know, a few years back, we're here with a 5-year rolling capital improvement plan. This year, we're going to be before you again. We've submitted the paperwork. Look forward to meetings to talk about a number of items there. It's about a $10.3 million request, which actually we're far lower than we anticipated we would be when we started a few years ago on this 5-year rolling plan. And as you know, during time, things change, things happen. A boiler may go, something may happen that you did not anticipate that we try to respond to. In these requests, there's a number of equipment. We have police cruisers, 10 of them. There's a street sweeper. There's some park department vehicles. There's new breathing apparatus gear for the fire department, which is going to make their job safer and more efficient. There's a traffic improvement program. There's building improvements and technology improvements. The vast majority are probably building improvements. And most of those building improvements relate to our Quincy Public Schools, which are most of our buildings. So, again, I think this budget reflects the values that we set as a city. I'm proud of where we've been. I know there's a number of departments in here, and each of those departments have a special mission. But we all come together as one city, and we collaborate to provide the best possible services to the residents of the city. I know we talked about schools, whether it's public safety, whether it's parks, veteran services, our senior center, our library services, inspectional services, whatever the department may be, the city is working very, very well together in a collaborative effort to really provide the most efficient services that we can provide. And I will say, without a doubt, that we as a city, I don't think any community provides the services that this city does across the board. And I'm quite proud of that. And I look forward to deliberations. I know the finance chair, Councilor Kane, will be overseeing. We pledge any and all information that you may need. I know our department heads will look forward to meeting with you on any of these issues. At this point, that concludes my official presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has one.
Thank you very much, Mayor. We obviously appreciate your presence here this evening, and just kind of echo your sentiment. There's so much that goes into municipal government to make it move, and it wouldn't happen without the folks in the audience. So, on behalf of the Quincy City Council, we appreciate the work that you all do in your various capacities for the citizenry. It's a lot of work. Yeah. Thanks. Well deserved. You got anything? I know it's going to committee. Yeah, motion to committee. All right, it's moving to finance. Motion made by Councilor Kane, second by Councilor Lane. Did you want to say something, Council? Yeah, of course.
Thank you, President Kroll. Good evening, Mayor. How are you?
Councilor.
I just had a question. I know we're going to dive into this and do deep dives in Councilor Kane's committee, but just quickly, if you know, it says that the budget projected on conservative new growth of at least $5 million. Do we know what the balance looks like now from commercial growth versus residential growth?
Could you repeat that? I'm in trouble
Do
hearing.
we just know what the balance is in our new growth that we're seeing here in the city? How much of what percentage of that is commercial growth and how much of that is residential growth?
Well, that is something we watch very closely. As you know, the last couple of years, we've had a tremendous shift to the residential burden because of the values. This past year, the average single-family tax went up $120. That was based on a $37,000 increase in the average single-family home. So Colleen Haley and the team really watch that and monitor that very closely. The commercial values, though have gone up, are not at the same level as the residential values. That will continue to be a balance issue. But these new growth numbers that we're seeing each year are tremendous and help us feed this budget and help put teachers in the classroom and police and firefighters on the streets. It's very healthy, which is separate from the diff numbers. The diff numbers are very healthy as well.
Okay, great. I know we're going to dive into this in more detail in Councilor Kane's committee, but that was just one of the first things that popped into my head is just keeping an eye on sort of what that balance looks like. And then we'll end with this. I just wanted to say, that these are one of the moments in during the council session that I get really excited about. One, because we have an opportunity to really have a one-to-one with all the different department heads and really dive deep into the work that they've been doing throughout the year. We have an opportunity to engage with them certainly throughout the year, as constituents reach out to us and as issues come up, but to have an opportunity to have them in front of us to showcase all of the hard work they've put in throughout the year is a really exciting time for me. And, as those cities and towns you listed that had the Prop 2.5 override, I've had a couple of friends in some of these cities and towns, even in Melrose, they had one recently, that unfortunately have to make that step, right, in order to meet their needs and to ensure that they're staying on top of those services that they need to provide to those residents. And we're so far from having to do that, and our departments still provide exceptional service to our residents. And so I just want to take a moment to commend not just the departments, but you, of course, in leading that. And, when I'm hearing these horror stories of unfortunately, cities and towns that do have to make that hard decision and to do that, it really is, a pretty neat thing to be able to come back and say that we haven't had to do that yet. You know, we're growing a lot here in the city, we're growing rapidly, and again, our services need to expand to make sure that we are servicing all the residents in the city as we grow, and we're doing so without being close to even having to look at a 2.5 override. So I appreciate that, and I thank you and your departments for ensuring that we're doing that properly. So thank you, I look forward to diving into this budget. Thank you.
My pleasure, Counselor. Motion made by Counselor Kane, seconded by Counselor Liang, heading to Finance. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Next item on the agenda, please, Madam Clerk.
Number 2, 2019-084, an appropriation fiscal 2020 sewer enterprise budget.
Counselor Kane.
Motion to move to Finance Committee.
Motion made by Counselor Kane to move to Finance, seconded by Counselor Hughes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Next item on the agenda, please, Madam Clerk.
Number 3,
Motion to waive the reading.
2019-085.
Motion made by Counselor Kane to waive the reading on the motion, Counselor.
Motion to move to Finance Committee.
Motion made by Counselor Kane to move to Finance, second by Counselor Hughes. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? The ayes have it. Next item, please, Madam Clerk.
Number 4,
Motion to waive the reading.
2019-086.
Motion made by Counselor Kane to waive the reading.
Motion to move to Finance Committee.
And move to Finance Committee, second by Counselor Hughes. All those in favor? Opposed? The item moves to committee.
Next is number 5,
Motion to waive the reading.
2019-087.
Motion made by Counselor Kane on the motion.
Motion to move to Finance Committee.
Motion made to move to Finance by Counselor Kane, second by Counselor Hughes. All those in favor? Opposed? The ayes have it.
Next is number 6,
Motion to waive the reading.
2019-088.
Motion made to waive the reading by Counselor Kane on the motion.
Motion to move to Finance Committee.
Motion made by Counselor Kane, second by Counselor Hughes to move to Finance. All those in favor? Opposed? The ayes have it. Next item, please. Madam
Number
Clerk.
7, 2019-089, land easement for 1 through 13 Newport Avenue.
Speaking on this?
Be it ordained by His Honor the Mayor is duly authorized to execute and deliver the grant of easement of a certain parcel of land containing 1,399 square feet of land, more or less, as more particularly described in a legal description attached as Exhibit A, and incorporated herein by reference.
Motion made by Counselor Hughes. Did you want to speak, Jim?
I don't need to, no.
Okay.
There's questions.
Motion made by Counselor Hughes to approve the item. Do I hear a second? Second by Counselor Kane. Any discussion? Counselor Yang? Yep.
Just to clarify, is this this easement of 1 to 13 Newport Avenue, is it a taking of a property? No. It's not, okay. That's fine, I heard a no. So just
That
wanted
would
to
probably be, I mean, if you have questions, the solicitor's here, if you'd like to engage with them.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I respect Counselor Kane, I don't know if he's the city solicitor status, but yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure, it's not, this isn't, this easement isn't a land taking, is it?
Evening.
This isn't a land taking, correct?
No, this is an easement.
Okay,
We're granting easement rights to the property owner, and essentially what they're doing is they're going to create an entrance that intersects more cleanly with the sidewalk on West Squantum, and then maintain that area. It's
Okay.
somewhat similar to what we did across the street from the courthouse on the O'Connell building. But in the O'Connell case, we
okay.
conveyed the land because they were intruding in on the property off the roadway. In this particular instance, the property butts right up to the sidewalk, West Squantum Street. So the easement was the mechanism to use.
okay. Thank you, thank you for clarifying, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Any further discussion, questions? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Counselor Kane?
Yes.
Counselor DeBona? Counselor Harris? Counselor Hughes? Counselor Liang? Counselor Mahoney? Counselor McCarthy? Counselor Palmucci? President Kroll.
Yes, 9 members, the item passes. Next item on the agenda, please.
Next item is 2019-090.
Motion to waive the reading.
On the motion, Counselor.
This is something that was voted on by the Quincy Retirement Board recently. It's a cost of living adjustment for retirees. Also want to recognize that Lisa McBurney, the Executive Director, is here. Also board members, Rick Arienti, Rick Fitzpatrick, and to my right, Susan O'Connor. If there are any questions, I think Lisa would be more than willing to answer about this in the following proposal. But otherwise, I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion approved made by Counselor Kane, second by Counselor Hughes. First, welcome, Lisa.
Thank you
Nice to
very
see you.
much. And Ernie Arienti from our board, if you do not.
And Ernie Arienti from the board. Hi, Ernie. How are you? Nice to see you. Counselor Palmucci? Yep.
Both. Could you just explain this? First of all, let me just preface that by saying I voted against one of these once, and I've never gotten more phone calls for a single vote that I've taken with people yelling at me. And it wasn't because I was against it. I was following Councilor McNamee's lead, and we asked the director at the time what the basis was for the increase, and he didn't have an answer. And I said, well, I can't really support that. But so let me preface it by saying I will vote for this. I would just like you to explain it to me as to why I should.
Sure, this is a COLA base. It's an adjustment to the amount of the COLA base, so it's called a COLA base increase. So what we were looking for is for this year, the base increase will go up to $14,000, and then in 2021, it would go up to $15,000. That would mean on the first 3% of $14,000 and on the first 3% of $15,000 next year, that the retirees would get that COLA adjustment.
And is the COLA adjustment based on Social Security COLA adjustments, or do we have a different
The COLA
mechanism?
adjustment is set by PERAC.
Okay, all right, and that's the state
That's correct.
retirement board, okay. I will vote for this, thank you.
Motion made by Counselor Kane, second by Counselor Hughes. Any further questions? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Counselor Kane. Yes. Counselor DeBona. Yes. Counselor Harris. Yes. Counselor Hughes. Yes. Counselor Liang. Yes. Counselor Mahoney. Yes. Counselor McCarthy. Yes. Counselor Palmucci. Yes. President Kroll.
Yes, 9 members, the item passes. Next item on the agenda, please, Madam Clerk.
Motion to waive the reading.
Next, 9.
Do you want to explain it?
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is another deliberation from the Quincy Retirement Board. It is an adjustment in what is an annual stipend. It's an increase of $1,500 from $3,000 to $4,500, which is the first increase since 1997. Motion to approve.
Motion approved made by Counselor Kane, second by Counselor Hughes. Any discussion on the item? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Counselor Kane.
Yes.
Counselor DeBona.
Yes.
Counselor Harris. Yes. Counselor Hughes. Yes. Counselor Liang. Yes. Counselor Mahoney. Yes. Counselor McCarthy. Yes. Counselor Palmucci. Yes. President Kroll.
Yes.
9 members.
9 members, the item passes. Thanks again for being here tonight, Lisa. Ernie as well. Retirement looks good on you, pal, so keep it up. Yeah. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Ernie.
That concludes, right?
It
Yep,
does.
that concludes the regularly scheduled meeting. Before we go back to ordinance, approval of previous meeting minutes from April 22nd. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. At this point, I will recess the regularly scheduled city council meeting, and we will go back into ordinance.
Reopen the ordinance committee meeting at 8:16 PM. Mr. Stevens, if you wouldn't mind coming up, I think the last question, just to reiterate that Mr. Geary was reviewing for us before we went into questions, was the third question that we had from the previous ordinance committee meeting, which is, are all taxes and fines paid on properties designated for potential acquisition? So if you could just answer that question, and then we will open it up for questions from my colleagues.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here in front of the council. I do want to point out that you were all delivered a large binder of questions. We do have a number of the DIF questions, which is in another committee, that is in this binder. The urban renewal questions that came from this committee are up in the front. And to go through a few of them, we got a communication from Deborah Coughlin on the tax compliance of the proposed properties we're looking to acquire. We also have a list of the estimated cost of those acquisitions, which is another one of those questions. That's in a spreadsheet form. Mr. Geary had indicated that there was a public outreach policy that was also included in here. And we have consultant Jeff Fasher from BSC Group here with us. After the last meeting, the urban renewal plan is a very technical document, and he went ahead and had his team in their GIS department create a new conceptual plan. We included that here. And there's also a second plan here we call the reinvestment map. This tries to show what's been accomplished to date and what's underway, and then what's being planned. This is sort of the larger picture of urban renewal activities, because we're more than 10 years into it at this point. We did review the fines of these properties with the Inspectional Services Department. That department usually takes a policy of going through a lot of warnings of property owners without issuing any tickets. There has been some fines for some signage, whether it's in windows or out on the street, with folks that were repeat offenders to that. I think of particular concern to this body is there is one property we've identified, 1620 Hancock Street. It's the burnt-out building. A brief history on that from the Inspectional Services Department is that was damaged in a catastrophic fire in 1997. There was 10 fines or tickets issued to that property, and the city did ultimately take that case to court. The court case was dismissed. And then in 2013, I believe the owner of the property had passed away. There was a sale of that property. We've had some minor interaction with that new owner, one to allow some limited demolition of that building to occur, mainly to clear out the inside. But both the Planning Department and Inspectional Services Department have indicated that we would need a structural engineering report on the status of that building before we would feel comfortable moving forward with re-tenanting that structure. So that was the comment we received from the Building Department on that. So I mentioned we have Jeff Fasher from BSC Group. He presented the initial presentation on this. We also have R.J. Dowling from Woodard and Curran, who plays a key role with the utility work connected with this plan, and Planning Director Jim Fatsis, Bill Geary, you met, and myself. We're here to answer questions.
Great. Thank you. I will turn it over to my colleagues with any questions. Counselor DeBona?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a real quick comment here, just to follow up a little bit on Mr. Stevens was just talking about the 1620 Hancock Street with the fire since 1997. I saw Ernie Arienti that was in here just a little while ago. That was the old Tasso's Pizza. It was a good little place to go in. They had the pinball machine, good pizza. And it went down, and there's been nothing going on over there, and people still continuously ask me what's going on with that particular parcel. I think my distinguished colleague from Ward 4 talks about his office being right around the corner of that. So I'm happy to see that that's in the plan for acquisition. Looking through the 14 items, 14
properties.
Yep. 14 properties and property owners. This is a step in the right direction. I feel it's very vital for the downtown. We're starting to increase this URDP, which we're getting into certain other areas outside of that particular development we're having, and we're skirting out to the outside region. So I'm in support of this. I know there's some amendments in here that we're going to speak about in a little while, but I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what you just talked about, which is a blighted property that's nothing's been done with the fire that's in 1997, and here we are. Is that 25? Is that 30 years later?
Yeah, pretty
Is that
close.
correct?
20. Yeah.
Wow.
22.
So I know we spoke about this Hancock Street corridor. We had a meeting about this in this chamber last year with the Oversight chair across the way here, and we got some traction on this, and this is a situation where we need to work with the group that you're with, the mayor, the administration, the city council on, at the end of the day, making sure we do this right, making sure that the allocated funding from the DIF is going to help revitalize this whole downtown, and it doesn't come back on the taxpayers of the city. We have to make sure that this is the right thing to do. We have to kind of cross our Ts and dot our Is on this because we kind of have one shot at the apple here. So I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of my fellow councilors and what they have for amendments or their discussion on everything. But when you first said 1620, my head popped up with Tasso's Pizza. And I think, is Napoli's Pizza in here as well?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so the two pizza places are in there, okay. Gonna need some new pizza places, I miss those two places. Italian, Greek style pizza, they're two different versions. But anyways, I'd like to hear the rest of my colleagues. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor DeBona. Councilor Palmucci?
Councilor Kroll just whispered in my ear, I guess Councilor DeBona is hungry right now. Yeah, I don't know, we should. Don't forget Schoolhouse Pizza, right over there, not being taken, delicious. I have a question for the city solicitor. Did he go home, or where'd he go? All right. I'll ask Mr. Gary then, being an attorney. Can we amend the URDP, city council?
That is a city solicitor question.
Okay.
To be honest with you. My impression is no. But that is not predicated on any firsthand legal knowledge or research that I've done.
So the order before us is, I don't have it in front of me, but it's approval of the URDP as written. So you see that as a, order consolidated urban revitalization and development plan and amendment number 5. So I guess if we're not, so I've had this conversation with a number of folks since last week or last council meeting, because it's an interesting question. I just assumed we were able to amend it because we're the legislative body tasked with approving it. It actually came up with the LDA, because I was going to offer amendments to the LDA, and somebody whose legal opinion I don't respect, Mr. Walker's, said that we can't as a body, and I wanted to explore that further.
I certainly would take the view, as the administration has, that the body can make recommendations for improvements, and that it is incumbent upon the administration to value those recommendations and take them into account and adopt them to the extent that they make sense. And I most specifically would say that as it relates to the LDA, because, as I mentioned when I was at the podium last time when we were talking about the LDA, there's a reason why it's named a draft.
Right.
And I would say that the council, both individual councilors, as well as acting through your legal counsel, Mr. Shea, certainly in the two LDAs that went before the council, its prior, the prior body as constituted, the administration did make a number of changes that made all the sense in the world. And so we do look upon the council as 9 fresh eyes, and that there, certainly there's a great deal of experience among the council members, and that we are looking to achieve an LDA or a public policy result, which is one we can all believe in, and we all feel confident will achieve the public policy goals, positive public policy goals we're trying to achieve together.
So it's either 18 ayes or you only think 4.5 counselors are looking at it? Mr. Walker, is Mr. Timmons going to join us, or we're just going to roll with it as is? Good, okay. All right, thank you, Jim. I'll wait for Jim to come back. We'll take it back up. Thanks, Bill. I move positive recommendation of the URDP as amended.
Yeah, I think I would like to hear from Mr. Timmons on that question. I think it's an important question to have answered. I do just have a couple of questions, but if any of my other colleagues have any other questions, I want to make sure to defer to you guys first. Okay. And I apologize, I don't know if this would go to Mr. Stevens or to Mr. Gear. I don't mean to point, I'm kind of like one of those people that I point when I talk. So the first is that, and this pertains again to the three questions that we had asked in the previous meeting, and I apologize, I haven't had time from when these documents were sent over earlier to dive into it. I was a little bit, but I'd appreciate any clarification. So one of the questions was to, I apologize, it wasn't on here, I think it was maybe in one of the other meetings, whether it was the LDA or the DIF, was the value of the Ross lot. That's answered in this packet, correct?
As we put together this binder, in behind the urban renewal section, we did include Ross lot valuation, but I do believe that is connected to the land disposition matter.
Gotcha, okay.
You know, again, we tried to bundle all of those questions so you all get them, you got them all at once. That was part of the delay to get those answers back.
No, and I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that I'm staying on task to the subject that's in front of us, and I'm trying to recall if that was something that was discussed in this or if it was discussed in one of the other two items that are related to this. So we will dive into that when we get into the LDA. And then the second question I have, and I think this goes more to your department, the question that I had, had a lot to do with communications to not just the landlords, but also tenants, what we've done thus far and what we're going to be doing moving forward. So in the memo that was sent over to us, at the bottom of the second page, it says here, the planning department will designate outreach staff who, in addition to making site visits, will be available by telephone to answer questions for citizens, merchants, and landowners. So I appreciate in here that you do clarify that you guys are available and accessible to everyone, right? Not just the landlord because of, again, sort of the legalese behind some of the conversations you can have. Your department is still open to everyone and anyone to come to you to ask you guys questions. So I appreciate that that language is in here. Who is the designated outreach staff going to be, though? And who are they currently, if they already exist?
Okay, great question. Myself and Jim Fatsis, because we've been involved in this downtown for quite a long time. We also have Maureen Geary and James Scribby in our economic development area that have also, they're the ones really hitting the streets. We've deployed them up into Wollaston as well as that initiative gets underway. But they're also very capable of handling and talking with businesses in the downtown. And, there is some other cross-training in the staff, but those would be the primary four. And would look to, potentially some folks in the mayor's office and some of the communications, as well as support from some of the consultants as well.
Great, okay, so it sounds like there's going to be a consolidated effort across multiple channels. That makes me happy, but it also makes me a little apprehensive, just because, again, when there's multiple lines of communication, right, sometimes for folks it might be confusing where, for one person, they might be going and talking to you in your office, and then for somebody else, they might be talking to someone that's on the ground that's there that day. And again, I just don't want folks to get confused as to who the person is to get the answers from. Does that make sense? And so that's something to just, again, I implore you to be mindful of, is that, certainly I think for this effort it's important, and so I would like to have more folks involved in it. I just want to make sure, though, that the front-facing person who actually touches folks in the community and those retailers is more streamlined and not so much, well, there's 3 people over here and 4 people over here and 8 people over here, and then there's your counselors, and then there's people from DPW. I mean, that's something that I want to avoid, where, potentially that landowner or business owner or resident necessarily has to go to multiple people to find answers. I think it would be great if we could streamline that method of communication. So that's something I implore you to continue to explore, and to finalize is have sort of like that 1 or 2 front-facing people who can be, lines of communication. If there is questions asked of them that they don't know, they can certainly come back to your department and the administration and folks in the downtown department to get those answers, but to not direct them all over the place, if that makes sense. I also just want to make sure that, the folks that we're paying as consultants who are responsible for this as well aren't going to be overlapping the work in your department. I really enjoy working with you. I've worked with you a lot in the past, and I think that, your the value of what you bring to the table is not just important here for the downtown, but across the city. And so I don't want to necessarily have you be the person solely responsible for communications. I certainly want your eyes on it. But that being said, I could see how the consultants specific to the downtown could take over a lot of that, again, front-facing communications with the retailers. I just want to be mindful of who that's going to be, what that scope of work looks like. And I'd probably dive into a little bit that more with you when we talk about the DIF conversation. But I appreciate that it's in here. I appreciate that your team is on it. I like the work that you guys do, and so I like that you guys are part of that conversation. So those are the two questions that I have relative to the URDP questions that we had. I do have a question for Mr. Geary for the memo that was sent over to us. Mr. Geary, if you could just come up for a second. So for the item that you said pertains to the 119 Parkway, so that's the IHOP restaurant and the Health Express Urgent Care, that's no longer going to be in this. We did get memos from two different folks who had also requested that their properties be taken out of this. And so I'm just curious as to what the line of thinking is for this 119 Parkway property, and then those other two properties as well that were requested of us.
We did not look at those other two properties. We were focused on the IHOP property, as I mentioned in the memo, because it is a key link, or maybe not a key link, as the case may be, when we complete the initial study that is hopefully going to be funded by the appropriation request that we have pending before you as to access egress issues to and from the parking garage, what the capacity of the parking garage will be. So that implicated this particular property, and during the process of looking at these various properties over the course of the last several months, if not a year, that property was maybe on, maybe off, and we determined that it made sense to hold it in abeyance until we had more data to make a decision on.
Okay, so from my understanding, then, the 119 Parkway property is a property that we want to take out of this because we already do have consideration for what we want to do with this property, correct?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Yeah, so I'm just, again, trying to understand. So the 119 Parkway that we're taking out of the URDP, it's because we've already identified it for use, correct?
We've already identified it for,
For use. I mean, it sounds like we're going to be using this for potentially the garage space.
no, we're taking it out because at this juncture, we don't know whether or not we're going to do that with that particular property. So until we have more certainty as to how that particular property plays a role, we want to remove it, strike it from the list, and it won't be on the list.
Yeah, no, again, I'm just trying to get an understanding because from what we had discussed at the last meeting, the other, let me step back here. So the URDP says that, or this amendment says that these properties are not properties that we're saying we're going to line up and take, or we're going to line up and demolish.
That's correct.
Right? But
It's all
now, this
potential.
119 property is being taken out of that consideration because it could potentially, we've ID'd it for something, whereas these other properties
Oh,
we
I
have
see. Okay.
not, right?
I'm sorry, I have difficulty hearing.
I
so-
tend to talk really quickly, so I
My
get it, but.
apologies. So I just want to make certain that I'm hearing your
I
question
appreciate that.
correctly and answering it correctly. Yes, that particular property is almost at ground zero as it relates to the potential new garage. And it will relate to the design of the garage and the design of the adjoining roadways that service that garage. So that, of all the properties, probably in addition to the burned-out properties that we've all had much discussion about and much consternation about, that particular property plays a significant role in the future of the Ross lot and accommodating what will hopefully be its parking needs for future new development there.
Okay. I appreciate the clarification. I just wanted to make sure that that was the thought process behind it. Okay. Thank you. I will I see that Mr. Timmons is here to answer Council Palmucci's prior question. I know that Council Kroll also has a question. Council Palmucci, do you mind if we go to Council Kroll first and then we'll have Mr. Timmons come up, or? Thank you, Council Palmucci. Council Kroll?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Hi, Bill. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. President.
A couple things, just for clarity, and I'm sorry, I was kind of commiserating with this side of the room, so I apologize if maybe you said some of the stuff that I'm about to ask. But just first thing, and I know for whatever reason, it was today. What would be helpful for me is if we could have kind of an advanced copy of maybe requested stuff before this evening.
Yes.
And if I thought it was maybe a little more complex of what the ask would be, I probably wouldn't even entertain it. So I just want to clarify what I believe the ask to be tonight. URDP Amendment 5 essentially is branching out, if you will, the capability or giving the city the flexibility to transform some of the properties that most, 8 or 9 out of 10 people would agree probably need some help,
Yes?
right? At least from your lens.
Yes.
And I hear this a lot from people that have been kind of monitoring the downtown progress, a lot of long-term residents, and, they'll say, not specifically, definitely not about all of these properties necessarily, but certainly some of them,
Yes.
that when they visit the downtown, they're absolutely amazed at the new construction and sort of the new heartbeat that's taking place in the downtown. Conversely, they'll look across the street and essentially see, a tale of of another world. God bless you.
Thank you.
So I see the value of the administration in this case engaging with some of the property owners to try and take those potential properties to the next level. That's all that's being contemplated here tonight, right?
That is-
Allowing the city of Quincy, I'm going to say, through the administration, to engage in a conversation to try to improve some of these properties listed here this evening. I'll be curious to hear, Council Palmucci's conversation with the solicitor regarding his item, because I think that kind of flows into what we're talking about. But just to be perfectly clear, URDP Amendment 5 basically says, City of Quincy, you can now go out and start to facilitate a conversation, hopefully to improve some of these properties, with the last resort of talking, possible acquisition.
I think that's perfectly well articulated, Mr. President.
So again, to the council, this is sort of the way that I'm viewing it, particularly with the financial stuff, because I realize, you'd put sort of a number, a cumulative number, of if all 10 properties were acquired at once, what it may look like. And I know that all 10 properties probably will not be acquired all at once. And then you also factored in the cost of a garage on the Ross lot as well, which is big bucks.
Yes, sir.
And again, the goal, at least in my mind, is, and I heard the mayor say it here this evening, to keep this project fully self-supporting itself.
Correct, sir.
Not me, not you, not anybody else, but the actual new growth in the downtown paying for the investment that the city of Quincy is making through ancillary resources such as district improvement finances, such as potential IQ money, and also through private development, so
Correct.
private monies. But again, I think it was very important for me to approach this evening knowing what is the ask, and that if for some reason multiple properties were entered into some sort of acquisition, that everything would come back to the council for a subsequent vote on that particular item, which obviously I can't tell you how I feel about that right now because it's not in front of me. But I'm in agreement that there's certain sections of downtown that could certainly use a lift. So that's, I just wanted to articulate, or maybe sort of talk out loud, is what I'm thinking, what's being contemplated, and what's being asked. And it sounds like I'm...
I think you articulated
You're right
it,
on
as
that.
I said, very well. These are potential acquisitions. Each one would have to be evaluated on its own merits or lack thereof, as the case may be.
And, I mean, you hope that, because some of them are in further need than others.
There's no doubt. Obviously, the poster property are the two burned-out buildings, but there are other buildings that in the downtown area that have character and could be restored and could be rehabilitated and contribute to new developments, but the prospects of that occurring lessen when the property owners don't maintain them, and they are looking at land banking them in hopes of values rising, and values will inevitably rise, of course, when new development occurs. And what we want is some synergy, is that some of the older buildings that are worthy of rehabilitation are rehabilitated by the current owners or new owners, as the case may be, or blended with an adjoining or a contiguous new project. And that was the whole purpose of the exercise, was to put those owners on notice that the city would like them to participate in the progress that's being made. And if not, give them cause to consider whether or not they should sell to somebody else who can and wants to.
As much as you say it's the hope of the administration of the city council, and/or the citizenry, that some of the property owners actively take part in the transformation, it's really what's contemplated in urban renewal, period.
Yes.
This is a district, this is a section, this is where we're poised for growth, all aboard.
Correct.
So, I could see the logic of why we would certainly want to engage some of these conversations. Again, it's going to come down to the fully self-supporting part, right? So I know we're looking at, another 65, 70 million bucks for a new garage over on the Ross lot. That's going to be financed somewhere.
Yes.
Right? So
I don't know if that's the number.
Correct.
Yet.
Right.
But certainly it's going to be a significant public investment.
So that's kind of why I wanted to see sort of how everything, to use your word, synergizes.
Yes.
Is that the active form of the word? Synergizes together or creates synergy.
Yes, sir.
So thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll continue to look at the numbers. Oh, yeah, that will.
Thank you. Councilor Palmucci?
Hey, Jim, can I ask you a question? So Jim, thanks for coming down. I had a question relative to the council's ability to amend an LDA or URDP. Do we have one?
Well, I have two issues with that one. One, it's a that's a tough pop quiz question. I'm gonna have to look at that.
Okay.
I'm inclined to say no for this reason, because the way 121B works, and I used to hear this from Mr. Fatsy's predecessor, Mr. Attorney Dennis Harrington. He always talked about the fact that the planning department was really the driver. And when I looked at this order on Saturday and what went on, I did look a little bit at the authority stuff, just following the statutory references in case a question came up. I didn't anticipate this amending, but 121B contemplates a process that is really focused on the planning board and the planning department working together, certifying that a particular agenda is in order, and then moving forward with a plan on that. And I view your role very similar to that as in the municipal budget process, that you're here to review things and just ensure that everything's okay, but it's really an initiative of the planning department, and then it goes up to the state, to DHCD. So I don't think that this body could initiate something as a body. That doesn't mean you couldn't approach the planning department and say, this is a thought I have, and have them go through their process internally. But What's before you now is something that is the product of the work and planning that they've done and the consideration. And I think that your role is merely to hear the presentation and act as you do during the municipal budget process. I'm happy to look at it further, though, because like if you would ask me a zoning question or something like that, I'd be very comfortable in the pop quiz, but this is a tough one.
And is your analysis the same for the LDA, or would it be different because it's a different process?
Well, the LDA is a little bit different because that's initiated in a different manner. And if you're talking about the current LDA before the body, due to the sub-issues, I've worked on one particular issue there that I have some pretty strong feelings about that you'll all be hearing about sooner rather than later. But that's mostly been handled by Mr. Geary, and that's something I can look at. But I would say it's similar, even though it evolves a little bit differently because of the mayor's role.
And in the budget process, we're allowed to cut, right? So we
Right.
can't add, but we're allowed to cut. So theoretically, there would be some ability to remove instead of add things to the URDP, right? Arguably, because you're,
Understood. What I was seeing as analogous was more that you don't have a right to initiate during the budget process, and that's what I was kind of responding to.
Right.
I believe, I'm thinking, and it's an inclination, it's not something I've considered, that 121B, you don't have a right to initiate, which is what you're really asking when you talk about an amendment. Whether you can initiate a cut, I don't know that either. I don't know on either end, but
yeah.
I'm happy
No,
to
I
find out.
appreciate if you look into it. I mean, I think we chatted after the last meeting, or I had thrown this out there, it's always been, I've always found it, I don't know, odd that the mayor introduces legislation into the council under his own name, rather than with a sponsor from the body.
Understood.
Because I want to, and I know the charter allows so that the mayor sets the agenda for the city council, and I know that's been the way we've done it, but it raises the question, so what happens when there is an amendment that is needed, and it's the mayor's amendment? The mayor's not a member of the body, so how does an amendment occur within the LDA? Like, so we have a new draft that's going to come back. Theoretically, it should be reintroduced in a new form by the mayor, because the mayor can't amend something that's pending in this body. And then if the analysis is that this body can't amend something that the mayor puts in that capacity, then we're in a legislative session working on a piece of legislation that cannot be changed in any fashion or form by any of the parties involved.
Understood. I do recall, and this is what I was alluding to earlier, that you could possibly pursue. I do recall on one occasion when the mayor wanted to amend an order that he had introduced. He spoke with a member of the body, and that member agreed to introduce the
Right.
proposed amendment. So
Right.
it came before you in the
Through the-
manner you are
right.
now talking about. Yeah, so understood.
So
You're
it's
right.
something if you could look into in all your downtime, at
shall.
the solicitor's office, I'd appreciate
Been
that.
a slow week so far,
Yeah,
so I'm
thank
happy.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't know if there were other people waiting, but I would move positive recommendation of the URDP amendment.
Sure.
Amendment
Thank-
number 5.
Thank you, Councilmember Mather. I believe I have one more, unless somebody else would like to speak. Councilor Mahoney?
So I think it's for Mr. Geary, but I'm not positive. It might be for you, Rob. For clarification, so when we're talking about, and these are just, again, I'm going to reiterate what we've been saying all along. The URDP, we're extending it for number 5, extends it into the area of Hancock Street with these 14 locations minus IHOP, so 13 locations, correct? And 2 of those locations that were identified weren't identified for a taking, but what were they identified for? Can we just have clarification for that?
Good evening, Rob Stevens, Deputy Planning Director. So the urban renewal regulations by DHCD allows you to take property for urban renewal reasons. One is which for demolition and clearance for new construction, and the other is for rehab. There are two out of the original 14 properties that have historic or just historic character that we have identified for acquisition, potential acquisition, but only for rehab, not for clearance.
So is it because they're historical buildings? Is that why they're?
Correct, and
Okay.
they've been identified locally by the city of Quincy as having historic character.
Okay. So in the response for that, when we identify something for rehab, and when talking about the identified buildings and the opportunities there, so it would be if you were, for any of these locations, if a owner is interested in knowing what the direction is for the city, I think this is where some of the building owners do struggle. They want to know a little bit more clarification on what the direction is for the city. Is the city going to help educate the owners of the building? It might be something that they want to sell, if there's something that's out there that's interested in selling, or, you know, if you're looking for these buildings to fit into a, for lack of a better, fit into the character of what we're trying to accomplish in downtown. Are you sharing that kind of forward thinking with the owners of the building currently?
I have had conversations with the owner of the building.
All of the buildings?
With the release of this plan. It's common ownership of both buildings. I think a lot of the motivation has to do with the Hancock Adams Common and that project. The Granite Trust Building just went through a major overhaul, cleaning of the outside, adding up lighting, really trying to create a really unique civic space, not just with the Common, but with the surrounding properties. We've worked with President's Place to re-tenant a lot of their first floor retail, and we're also looking at the Temple Street block. There's been a number of rehabs in there. I think one of the concerns that we see potentially happening is maybe not with this current owner, but there may be the next owner.
Yeah.
That property may become very desirable. You know, we've seen the Stop and Shop supermarket company expand across the street. We understand that, you know, they're going through a growth period here in Quincy. That's directly adjacent to that. You know, we encourage rehab of all the buildings, whether they're historic or not.
Exactly. I think the reason why I'm asking that is that in the URDP, we're just recognizing that this is the next potentially extended corridor of the city of Quincy downtown that is poised for growth. Some of the locations that are being identified, and we're not taking them, we're adding them to the URDP. So they potentially, they're identified as the next potential groups of areas of the downtown that, for lack of a better term, should be poised for change or growth. Some of the owners of these buildings are looking for the city to kind of give them or help them understand what it is, the direction that you're trying to go. Is it only new buildings, or is it other things that could happen with the buildings as they currently stand? Have we, you know, without saying, so when we say, you know, live, work, play, what I'm asking is, in the URDP to extend it to be the taking of these buildings, and you said that you've promoted and you've talked to all the building owners. Do they know what's expected if they want to invest in their buildings, what the anticipation is for the city for that area? Past work, past live, work, play.
Yeah, I mean, I would say with a lot of the new construction that's occurred, you know, first floor retail, activating your street front. You know, we are looking for wider sidewalks. A lot of the new construction has been set back off of the back of sidewalk to increase that.
So without knocking your building down, I mean, so what you're saying is, if somebody owns a building in the downtown, rehabbing the building may not be enough. It's pretty much taking the building down and starting from scratch, because.
So are you sticking with the two with
No,
historic character?
I'm just talking about in
opening it up?
general.
So,
It's been brought to my attention, and for me, you know, the burnt out buildings, you know, to know that it got sold in 2013, and this street was not in the URDP in the first place. So I can get past that, because if it was in the URDP, we could have already acquired that burnt out building and had something else happen. I guess what I'm trying to figure out here is an understanding for owners of the building to understand, you know, what is the vision for the downtown, other than the new buildings that are going up? You know, what is it, the hopes, or what are the kinds of industry that you want to bring to the downtown? Are we trying, and that is part of, and it's part of a master, is the master developer of the downtown. It's kind of the vision of what, your anticipation is for that. I can get behind certain things. I just want to make sure that as I'm getting behind it, that there is more than just the tagline. There's a little bit more depth into that. I can use, for example, you have had charrettes, and you did it at Wollaston, where you kind of let everybody think this is what you're going to get. Well, those are great, except for when you turn it around, and now we're at the place of this is what we want, but how are we going to get there? So building owners want to know, do we want to stick around and play, or do we want, the other conversation is, and if we don't, we have the option of potentially having it, the building stacked in a group to be taken by maybe another developer. That's pretty much what we're doing in this URDP. I guess what I'm trying to understand from the city, yes, we have talked to the building owners, but have we explained the vision of what you're trying to get accomplished to those building owners? So if they want to do it for their own self-sacrifice to stay in the city of Quincy, if they wanted to do that, do they understand what they need to do to be able to be part of that growth?
Well,
Do you feel that you've educated and you've shared that? Because
Well, that strategy, that really started, back in 2005 when we rezoned downtown. One of the things that was thought of at the time was a lot of these downtown sites were substandard. That, there's a reason why people weren't redeveloping. They were small. That's why in that zoning,
No,
the
I
minimum
understand.
lot size is 15,000 square feet.
I understand
So
that. I
a
guess
lo-
the reason why I'm asking that is because that was 2005 and that was Streetworks and we had options on them.
That wasn't Streetworks in 2005.
So I'm trying to understand, well, Streetworks came in and then it was with Street. So I'm trying to understand when, and just, again, I've been looking for this for a while. When we're the master developer of the downtown visions of what we want, is there, do we have something that's concrete that you share with them and say, this is where we think the buildings are going and we're going to put this into the opportunity, this is in an opportunity zone. So there's lots of benefits to rehabbing the buildings that are in the downtown. Do the owners of the buildings understand the direction that the downtown is going in, and have they been articulated by the city of Quincy as a master developer of how they can potentially be part of the solution for the downtown, do you feel?
Absolutely, like I mentioned, going back, to 2005, the urban renewal plan originally came in 2007, along with the DIF program. Streetworks came in Amendment 1, which was 2009, and this has been a growing document, a vision of not only myself, not only, the 9 members here, but all of the predecessors, along the way, because this has to work between the administration, between the planning department, and with the city council. This document helps with that vision. Amendment 4 reset the vision. We're master developers on the city lots, the Hancock lot and the Ross Garage, because we own those lots and we could participate directly. We are steering away, or we're going on the edges of both of those properties, but we want to, through this Amendment 5, encourage the private business to try to, be bold, to come in with the reinvestments. There's.
And you've seen none of those building owners that have been identified, not one of them have come in and spoke about what their hopes for their buildings were.
The current 14 property owners? There's been some conversations along the way, but we've seen no action. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to move forward and identify them, to really start to trigger those conversations and advance those. There's a lot of investment that's occurred, and there's a lot of momentum in this market to get that mixed use, first floor retail, activate. We had a focus of residential over on the Hancock lot side, and now we're trying to shift and really encourage commercial development over on the Ross side, and that LDA proposal that's before you is a big step in the right direction.
I guess I still get concerned. I mean, I understand what we're doing with this. It's a long time that in coming in this situation, and buildings and owners just in general, when we talk about the downtown with Streetworks and with a lot of the stuff that we were doing, they're patient. I think they're sitting. I mean, in some situations like the burnt out building, they're sitting on the buildings just waiting for their offer to come, and they're going to get top dollar probably.
Yeah.
But it's inappropriate because it just makes me question, why we didn't do this earlier. I understand that this is before us tonight, but again, I'll go back to the why we didn't do it earlier. And are there other areas in the downtown is this the last one that we're going to add to the URDP? Or are we looking further out past Hancock Street, just out of curiosity?
We've had a conversation about expanding the boundary. You know, we're starting to get, you know, I think we've had recently redevelopment down on the McGrath Highway corridor. We've had conversations down over on School Street in that area. I think we've always, even from the beginning, saw the Star Market site, you know, with that huge parking lot as ripe for development. You know, do we expand over there? Those are things we are constantly looking for. You know, do we need the development tools?
Yeah,
You
I guess
know,
again,
in
it
the
goes.
urban renewal plan.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to that question of, you know, expanding at some point, you shouldn't have to expand anymore. The development should just come as a natural growth to the urban development plan, correct? I mean, there's a certain point when you don't have to keep expanding it because the proof is in the pudding of what you've already created.
Or the private market will do it on its own. You know,
Right.
again, the urban renewal is that but for government involvement to organize
Right,
the
for-
entirety of
Yeah, so
infrastructure.
I understand. It was brought
Yep.
into play because there's been decades of non-movement in specific areas, not just in Quincy, but in other areas as well. And a lot of people are using urban redevelopment as a tool to be able to kickstart and hopefully change the landscape of what once was a thriving area of their communities back to being that thriving area. The hope is that you don't have to keep adding to it and adding more acquisitions to it. We're now adding to it. I guess the question is, when do we, and we're claiming success, but at the same time, we're having to add to it. And I don't disagree that Hancock Street is something that we have to, it's something, it makes me question why it's taken us, why wasn't it there in the first place? So, but I guess I just want to make sure that I go back to that economic development plan and the types of organizations and the types of commercial that we're trying to bring in and what our goals are. Because you can purchase everything up and you can create all real estate, you know, apartments, and it may not bring, and right now, the storefronts that we do have, many of the restaurants are there, but the Galvin buildings do not have, they have open houses in the whole bottom. We haven't seen anything come into those. So my concern is we have to have that plan to how we're going to be able to manage that, or we'll have new buildings with empty storefronts. That's a concern. So I'm going to stay with that, but as far as the buildings that we've identified, you know, I'm not against it. I just keep reiterating the same thing just because they all play together. The URDP, the DIF, the land acquisitions, they're all part of the same situation, and we have to make sure we're thinking them all through, so.
And there's another comment, and this I think also goes to some of Councilor Liang's concerns, is when Streetworks was here, they had a lot of options on a lot of properties, and they were emptying a lot. And they left town in 2014, and since then, we've had to, you know, downtown is still a working downtown. It's not like this is an area behind fences. I think the planning department, along with inspectional services department, and the department also supports the historic commission that deals with some of the historic facades and signage. We collectively work with any new tenants coming into any of the spaces that were vacant. So I think the number's up over 50 new businesses. So we get to see who's coming. We get to talk to them. We tell them all that they're in an urban renewal area. It's exciting, but you know, we make them aware.
No, it doesn't come without its
and that's
challenges. I
great.
mean, and we have seen some come and go. I mean, Katie's Burger came and it's gone. It's not there anymore. The only vegan restaurant that we had, I believe, in the city of Quincy came, and I don't think they relocated in Quincy, did they?
Katie's?
No, Katie's Burgers.
No, that was originally from Marshfield.
No, the vegan
Oh, the
brewery.
vegan beer hall. Believe that was sort of more of a temporary. You know, we did work with them.
They didn't relocate in Quincy, did they?
I do not believe so. No.
Yeah. So again, that goes back to my concern. Oftentimes what happens in those urban development type places is that you can help negotiate, bring in newer businesses or smaller businesses into potentially a lower income rental for temporary purposes. So they can get up and operational until they can find a new location for themselves. I'm not seeing a lot of that happening. And again, it goes back to that, how you're developing those relationships and marketing the city of Quincy to be able to bring those types of businesses to the downtown. And there's many ways, and there's many communities who have had successes by going out and marketing with the plan, going out to other communities and suggesting maybe a satellite new or a pop-up to be able to come from another community that's having success for another small business to come to potentially our community as an expansion. you see restaurants do it all the time. They start in one location and they pop up in other areas because they're taking the opportunities as they exist in other communities as well. But I'm talking about actual shops and stores and different things. I go back to that because I asked for a long time ago what was our economic plan, not just for the downtown city of Quincy, but throughout our whole city, but mostly because we're the master developer for the downtown, and we don't have that. And it's concerning to me because we're leaving it up to the buildings that are going up saying, they will come when we build them, but we're not seeing that, and we're not helping direct the types of things that we want, other than restaurants. That's what we have at this current moment. And now we're talking about a medical office building. Those are not bad things. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that it really is up to us to kind of mold what we're hoping to see as well. And it's part of all of these pieces. If you don't have it as part of your plan, then it's hard to execute on the plan that you can put as much as you want into a URDP and hope that it will all show up at some point, but we have to have some thought behind what it is that we're trying to mold. So, thank you.
I agree. I think that, you bring up good points, because like this URDP, and I appreciate that, we're constantly reviewing it and making sure that it's up to date, right? So obviously this is a living document, and even with this amendment, it's going to continue to evolve and change over time. And I just want to make sure that, this roadmap, which essentially provides, expectations and guidelines for folks who have been here or new folks who are looking to come here to understand the vision that we are looking to execute down here in the downtown. I just want to make sure, and I think it's been reiterated a number of times over the last few meetings, that communications is key as this document evolves, and not just with us, but with everyone that's involved, whether they're residents living in this neighborhood, visiting this neighborhood, and again, retailers and landowners alike in this area. So I hope that point has really hit home tonight. I'm excited to see that there's an identified communications plan in here. I'm looking forward to seeing it executed. And again, as this document continues to evolve, so too do I hope that the communication plan will evolve over time as well. So thank you for your time, Mr. Stevens, Mr. Geary, for being here tonight. And with that, I know that there was a motion made for positive recommendation on this order this evening. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. And at this point, I will close the ordinance committee meeting at 9:09 p.m. No, so there is, this is not a scheduled public hearing. This is just an ordinance committee meeting. There was a public hearing scheduled, I don't remember the date exactly, but we already have a public hearing that was scheduled. And we can discuss this afterwards, but, I have closed this meeting out, and, we are going to resume the regularly scheduled council meeting. Again, we've already had the public hearing portion of this.
All right, folks, I would like to call the regularly scheduled May 6th City Council meeting back to order. We left off with communications and reports from the mayor and other city officers and city boards, and the city clerk has a couple of utilities. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. I do have a couple of grant of locations here this evening, and we have one on Hancock Street. It is pole required due to a partial of undergrounding overhead lines due to a building at 150 Hancock Street, building close to existing overhead lines. And there is new conduit required to underground overhead lines at 150 Hancock Street due to the new building as well. So those will go to... Did we refer them to Public Works? Yes, thank you.
Going to Public Works?
Yes.
Okey doke. Are you all set, Madam Clerk?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other communications and reports? Seeing none. Unfinished business and preceding meeting? Seeing none. Reports of committees and from the Ordinance Committee. Councilor Liang.
I have a couple of traffics, but I just want to get through a couple of other items first. So this evening and previous meetings, we had discussed Council Order 2019-042. I move positive recommendation.
Motion made by Councilor Yang, seconded by Councilor Harris. Any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilor Kane. Yes. Councilor DeBona. Yes. Councilor Harris. Yes. Councilor Hughes. Yes. Counsel Liang.
Yes.
Counsel Mahoney. Counsel McCarthy. Counsel Palmucci.
Yes.
President Kroll.
Yes.
9 members.
9 members.
Thank you. Now for the traffics, we have a few in Ward 1. The first is 2019-075, remove stop sign on Longwood Road, south eastbound intersecting with Highfield Road. I move positive recommendation.
Motion made by Counsel Yang, second by Counsel McCarthy. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk.
Counsel Kane. Yes. Counsel DeBona. Counsel Harris.
Yes.
Counsel Hughes. Yes. Counsel Liang.
Yes.
Counsel Mahoney. Counsel McCarthy. Yes. Counsel Palmucci.
Yes.
President Kroll.
Yes.
9
9
members.
The item passes.
Next is 2019-076. I had no parking on both sides of C Street from Bayview Ave to, Fensmere Ave. I move positive recommendation.
Motion made by Counsel Yang, second by Counsel McCarthy. Any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk. please
Counsel
call the roll.
Kane. Counsel DeBona. Counsel Harris. Counsel Hughes.
Yes.
Counsel Liang.
Yes.
Counsel Mahoney. Yes. Counsel McCarthy.
Yes.
Counsel Palmucci.
Yes.
President Kroll.
Yes.
9
9
members.
The item passes.
Okay, next we got 2019-077. I had no parking on the south side of Bailey Street from Marymount Road to Park Lane. I move positive recommendation.
Motion made by Counsel Yang, second by Counsel McCarthy. Any discussion? Madam Clerk.
Counsel Kane. Yes. Counsel DeBona. Yes. Counsel Harris. Yes. Counsel Hughes. Counsel Liang.
Yes.
Counsel Mahoney. Yes. Counsel McCarthy. Yes. Counsel Palmucci. President Kroll.
Yes. 9 members.
Thank you. We got 2019-078. I had handicap parking at 20 Woodward Ave. I move positive recommendation.
Motion made by Counsel Yang, second by Counsel McCarthy. Any discussion? Madam Clerk.
Counsel Kane. Yes. Counsel DeBona. Yes. Counsel Harris. Yes. Counsel Hughes.
Yes.
Counsel Liang.
Yes.
Counsel Mahoney.
Yes.
Counsel McCarthy.
Yes.
Counsel Palmucci.
Yes.
President Kroll.
Yes.
9 members.
9 members. The item passes.
Okay, we've got 2019-079. I had stop sign on Penns Hill Road, northbound intersecting with Biden Road. I move positive recommendation.
Where is that?
On Biden Road?
Oh, okay. That's what I thought she said. Motion made by Counsel Yang. I'll second it. Any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk?
Counsel Kane. Yes. Counsel DeBona. Yes. Counsel Harris. Yes. Counsel Hughes. Counsel Liang.
Yes.
Counsel Mahoney. Counsel McCarthy. Yes. Counsel Palmucci.
Yes.
President Kroll.
Yes. 9 members.
Last one, 2019-080. I had 2-hour parking on both sides of Davison Street West, Swanham Street to
Motion
the
made by
end. I move
Counsel-
positive recommendation.
Motion made by Counsel Yang, second by Counsel Harris. Any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk?
Counsel Kane. Yes. Counsel DeBona. Yes. Counsel Harris. Yes. Counsel Hughes.
Yes.
Counsel Liang.
Yes.
Counsel Mahoney.
Yes.
Counsel McCarthy. Yes. Counsel Palmucci.
Yes.
President Kroll.
Yes. 9 members.
9 members.
Does that conclude the ordinance, Counsel?
Yes, thank
We
you.
good? All right. Presentations of petitions, memorials, and remonstrance. Nobody? Good? Yeah. All right. Motions, orders, and resolutions? All right. Scheduling of committee meetings and public hearings. I want to publicly thank Jennifer Manning for circulating around the spring edition of the Quincy City Council agenda, so hopefully that's all hit your inbox and those dates work for you. Council Harris, would you like to schedule something? Absolutely. What would you like, sir?
I'd like to schedule and advertise the following public hearings for petitions for utilities. On Monday, May 20th at 7:15, a public hearing, utility grant location, Mass Electric, Verizon at Whitwell Street. Then at 7:20, a public hearing, 2019-093, the utility grant location, Mass Electric, 150 Hancock Street. And then at 7:25, a public hearing, 2019-094, utility grant location, Mass Electric, 150 Hancock Street, the conduit.
And that's before the next council?
Before yes, May 20th.
Okey-doke. Perfect. Councilor Kane, I saw your Finance Committee. Did you want to reiterate any of that, or? Okay.
No, sounds good.
It's in memo form. Everybody has it? Everybody good? Everybody happy? Okay. So the meetings are scheduled. With that, I would entertain a so moved, and thank our partners at Quincy Access Television for covering us tonight, and the at-home viewer for tuning in. God bless.